Hey everybody, it's Tom
Blog
Hayes.
Talk Radio.
I get me every single time. Every single time. Hey man, this is Tom Hayes. It is a Friday afternoon snow. Absolutely incredible snow here in Boston. Well, I'm out in Templeton, Massachusetts right now in the remote studio. Uh, See a winter wonderland. Actually, it's quite beautiful, even though it is way too early for this. I have a great show today. I am a little bit behind as always, but I am just plugging in the numbers to call an amazing woman, a great friend of mine, and it's a wild and crazy story how we met, and we're going to do that as soon as we call. Um, I hope she picks up because she's a very with phone calls all over the world, all over the country. She's it is 4 o'clock, and we, she lives out in Omaha, Nebraska, and she lives there. And oh well, let's let's do that again. Oh, okay. Until we get her. Oh, come on, folks.
Hello?
Oh, there you are. Hey, I've just been talking like an idiot
Hey.
here until you showed up. How are you, Lynda?
Hey, I'm good. 1 second.
You know, when we do this in this homespun way, there's always a glitch somewhere, but we get there
Yeah.
eventually. How are
Yeah.
you?
So I am good. I'm good. So am I clear?
Yeah, I can hear you. Should be able to get your volume up just a little bit more. I think.
Okay.
Um, you want to do a little test?
Yeah. Is this better?
Yeah, much better.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
How
I was
are you?
just in my shy, quiet voice. I'm
Okay,
good.
yeah,
I
no, no,
am
get your.
good.
We want your booming, spiritual, fearless, uh, intrepid world traveler, miracle observer, and beneficiary. That kind of voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, whenever we do these, how many have we done? I think we've done a couple, haven't we?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think maybe three because we did. I think after I went to Peru. I think three because I found them. I was looking on Facebook and I was like, oh yeah, and so I looked on and they were still archived, and so I sent them to a few people that just would appreciate the journey.
Yeah, and I love the title you gave me today, The Road from Fear to Magic, The Long Road from Omaha, Nebraska to Pune, India. I think it's
Yeah,
always
Pune
fun.
is what we call it.
Pune, okay. Thank you. Um, I I always enjoy telling our encounter how this all happened because that alone is enough for a podcast. Um,
Yeah,
shall I give it from my viewpoint first, and
I
then
think so. Yeah, I think
okay?
so. And let me switch. So let me switch to my AirPods, and you tell me if the sound is better or worse. 1 second.
Well, that's worse because I can't hear you at all.
Can you hear me here now?
Oh no! Go ahead, say something. Test.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
Okay. Yeah, I've got my AirPods on, and
Yeah, much
sometimes they're
better.
better. Okay, good.
Yeah. Yeah, much better. Thank you. All right, so here goes. At the time, I was involved with my venture with Beantown Pals, which was we created a character. I started an animation business after I retired, and the animation business turned into a toy business, and it was all centered around uh, Boston, which is known as Beantown. We created a character, an actual character, and we actually patented and copyrighted the character. And from that, we had a mascot, and we had a toy line as well as some animations. And from yeah, I'll let you fill in more of the details, but I'm remembering now that you were actually had found the bean before you found me. You were on Newbury Street. But in any case, I was heavily involved in the business, but yet I was still doing stand-up comedy. And I had a show with if I get it right, a software company that created software for banks. And it was in the John Moakley courthouse, which, I dreaded all day long. Number one, I didn't think entertaining software engineers was going to be the prime audience for me, nor did I know the structure of the John Moakley building. It's this huge venue. I mean, with just a wall of glass, beautiful building looking out into Boston Harbor. And I just knew the conditions, everything. I was in a negative mood. However, I was reading. I was heavy back into creative visualization and the law of attraction. And I had been reading Abraham Hicks' book, The Law of Attraction. So I said to myself, enough negativity, spin this in a positive way. You're going to go, you're going to have a great time. You're going to wow these people. They're going to be wonderful people, and it's going to be a fabulous show. And I tried to hold on to that feeling as long as I could, as I looked at the setup, which was absolutely miserable. But as I started the show, it was magical. Everybody had a good time. I had a good time, so much so that when I finished, there were so many people giving me kudos and accolades and congratulations, blah, blah. I was starving. And I think I almost passed out. I was so hungry. And I just, all I wanted to do was grab a plate of food and hide. And I got as far away from the crowd as I could. And all of a sudden, this young lady walks up to me, and I'm like, oh, I just want to eat. But you were so cordial, and you said, hi, I just wanted to tell you how great the show was. And I said, thank you. And so to make a little, a little conversation, I said, gee, how long have you been at the bank? And you said to me, about 25 years, I think, at that time. And you said, I said, do you enjoy it? You said, well, yeah, but their mindset's a little different than mine. They kind of come from a point of scarcity, and I like to think of abundance. And I said to you, the law of attraction, and you said Abraham Hicks, I think. And at that time, I was struggling with the part of the book where I was wondering, is it actually me creating it, or is it something else? Is it something bigger than me? Is it the universe? Is it God? What is it? And so I explained that to you, and you said to me, well, you really don't have a grasp on co-creation. And now that began our relationship, because, come on, how many people walk around with a working knowledge of co-creation and the law of attraction and Abraham Hicks? And you sat down and we just engaged. The answer that I was looking for was absolutely a manifestation. I'm looking for the answer to co-creation, and you sit down and start to explain it to me. And the fact that even though I tried to hide, you found me. So, a long story short, a lot of magic to me. I can't interpret it anyway, simply in that connection. And then we became friends. We spent the rest of the night talking about that. And then you explained how you knew about the bean and found that. And then for a while you were coming to Boston a lot, and we whenever we did that, we found a way to get together and talk about all this great stuff. And then so I'll let you bring it up to the point how you came up to me and how you saw it.
Yeah, well, thanks, Tom. So from my experience, and again, I was with, all of our users at this, banking conference, and I thought you were hysterical, and I didn't feel like the audience, really responded, as openly as they should have. So I really wanted to make sure, that you knew that, it was a great show. And then, within, like 90 seconds, the fact that we were on to law of attraction and speaking of, co-creation in the universe, I was as shocked as you were. And then, at one point, you actually offered, one of your beans, which was one of the
toys,
little plastic toys, right? And so I said, I know your bean. And it was because my daughter and I had been on Newbury Street, and we were actually going to the cupcake store,
right.
and the bean was, opening that cupcake store. And so, my daughter and I just watched from afar, and we're like, what's going on here, right? And, then of course we ended up going to the store, and, buying several items. And so the funny part is even today, my family knows, you as the bean guy, right? The bean guy from Boston. And they instantly know, who. And it was so fun when, the kids came out on my last trip to Boston last year that they actually got a chance, to meet you in person.
Yeah, I mean, talk about law of attraction. I mean, I think, who was the big law of attraction guy? Bob, I forget his last name right now. And, but then it got even more wild because I think we lost contact for a while. And you called me one day out of the blue and said to me, I don't know if you remember me. And I laughed. I said, I remember you. How can I possibly forget that encounter? And I think that was the beginning of your magical ride with that day you called me and you asked me, you had just been let go from that company and you wanted something told you to connect with me to ask me my advice.
Exactly. And so, because I grew up at that company and I was pretty clear, that it may be time for me to leave just as things were changing, but I didn't have the courage because, again, I grew up there and thought my role was to kind of hold things together. And at the point, when it was time to be done with that adventure, it was like, okay, what's next? And how do I think about, what's next? And what was really important in our conversation, and I still have the notes that I took because I wrote copious notes of like everything that you shared with me. But one of the key messages that you gave to me at that time was, because you knew that I'd traveled, I'd been to the Himalayas, I'd done some things, seen the world, and you said, okay, if you've seen the Grand Canyon, and you can imagine how that was created. Like, why would you limit your possibilities to what you can create? So you said, I know you're creative. You can imagine a lot of things personally, but really, why would you limit your possibilities? And so that was one of those key messages when I realized that it wasn't me that had to go find this. It was me that had to be open to the possibilities.
Wow. Fabulous. I get the chills now listening to that. That's great. Go ahead.
Yeah. And so what was interesting on that journey is the fact that if you would have told me that I would actually be off for 42 out of 52 weeks after that call, I would be freaking out because I did not know how this was all going to work. Because interesting enough, during that time, my husband had hip replacement surgery. I quickly picked up a second job. I mean, within 2 weeks, more because I thought I needed a job, not because I was listening to your advice. Picked up a job, thought it, could be, a great new thing. And within 90 days, that job went away. And I'm like, really? You could lose 2 jobs in 90 days? Like, how is this possible? And that was the Monday of Thanksgiving. And again, companies that would, let people go on the Monday before Thanksgiving, you're like, that's probably not the integrity that you're, interested in. And so now both my husband and I are going to be off. And so no income is coming in. And then, of course, what I realized at that time was there was a lot of unlearning that I needed to do. So a couple of the lessons. The first one was my relationship with time. because now actually I was the one that was deciding how I was going to spend, every minute. And when I talked to my financial planner at the time, I said, you count the pennies. I'm not going to be on that committee, but I'm going to have 11 million moments, because I figured if I lived till I was 90 and I slept for 7 hours, I'd have 11 million moments. And I said, it's your job to make sure I have enough money, enough pennies to do whatever I wanted to do in those 11 million moments. So that was my relationship with time. The second part is my relationship with money, right? And the idea of the fact that, just because there wasn't money coming in didn't mean that there wasn't an abundance of money. And what I learned over the next events that happened was the fact that I was so lucky to have an abundance of time at that time, maybe not an abundance of money, because the next thing that came up was my younger sister was diagnosed with cancer. And so during that journey I could show up for every doctor's appointment, chemo, radiation, everything that she, experienced. And I had a gift of time that I could show up for her. Our parents, my mother had passed away, so I was, really kind of in charge of this. And the fact that I had all the freedom that I needed to show up for her. I also had one of my best friends that was in her last stage of breast cancer. And I also had a chance to spend time with her. And when she made her transition, everybody was so shocked. And they're like, but Lynda, like we didn't know it was going to happen this fast. And we missed our moment. And I was so grateful that I didn't miss my moment. So that was, another lesson that I had to unlearn about my relationship with time. A third event that was so critical, in this time off was the fact that a good friend of mine who is a huge adventurous spirit, the day that my second job went away, she was mentioning to me that she was taking a group to India to trek in the Himalayas. And, in my mind, I'm from Nebraska, so 300 above sea level. I'd never hiked or camped in my life. And in my mind, I was thinking, okay, what can I say yes to? Okay, a trek in the Himalayas for my friend's 50th birthday or house payments. And I just kept, going back and forth. I'm like, well, wait a second. I'm always going to have house payments. I'm not always going to have an opportunity to trek for my friend's 50th birthday. And so I said yes to, this adventure to India. And so the time, that was necessary for me to prepare for that event. And it was a challenge to step way outside my comfort zone. I mean, we're talking as far outside I could even dream to be trekking in the Himalayas. And so the first night that I was in the tent in the Himalayas, I mean, that was the first night I'd ever camped in my life. And people, as I was preparing, they were like, you're doing what? What practice hikes have you been? You mean your first trip is to the Himalayas? I'm like, well, yeah. And so it was one of those deals where I think, the universe was basically challenging me to say, okay, you have an opportunity and, how big a risk are you going to take? And so, fear had been, kind of my constant companion. And I basically, took a huge leap of faith to decide to go trekking in the Himalayas.
Oh, this is so much fun. I've got so much. I'm actually, seriously, I'm getting the chills as you explain these things, because they, to me, I fit them into my model of, my perception of the world and life. And, I see it all as, at some point you must have come across the spiritual concept of a golden thread. We all have a golden thread in our journey that it's kind of all been laid out for us, and that, we do have a destiny, but we still have free choice. And you can either, go with the flow, as they say. And to me, this, validates my conception of that you got laid off for a reason. You got laid. I think I told you at the when you first called. I think I might have said do nothing. Just you said yeah, but I gotta have money. I gotta do. I said watch what happens. I said you've been set free. You're out there like a free radical. When an electron gets hit with a beam, it becomes a free radical and floats around till it locks into a higher orbit. And I said, I think you're on your way to a higher orbit, and don't worry, something's looking out for you. Your higher self, the universe, God, has released you from the orbit that you were previously in, and now you're going to have amazing adventures. And so, listening to this all over again, I can't hear it enough. And especially with the fear part, this lady in Nebraska who's now in the Himalayas. Come on, folks. And especially the fact that you never had, again, it fits into what you just told me a couple of minutes ago, that why limit your sense of what you want? Let the universe, and you could have, I'm sure you could have never even imagined the Himalayas at the time.
Never in my wildest dreams. And you mentioned the golden thread, and what was so interesting is things, so for instance, money was getting tight, and I happened to attract, a contract job, a 90-day contract job during this time, and I was sitting, in the chemo office with my sister, and this is her last chemo treatment. And I got this job offer, and I said, well, I would love to do this, but I've committed to 17 days, trekking in the Himalayas during this 90-day contract. And the answer was, oh, I think that'll be fine. And I'm just like, okay, really? Like, who is going to, allow someone on a 90-day contract to be gone for 17 days, right? And it was just like the universe saying, hey, I know it's going to be tight while you're on your trek, so let me just get some, revenue flowing. And then some of the golden thread opportunities started to show up. So, for example, I had, posted for a job in January of that year, and it wasn't until I got back from my trek that I got a call basically from the company that I had posted the job for in January, and now this is August. And what was so interesting is they said, yeah, we were talking with someone, yesterday, and they mentioned your name, and I sent my resume. They flew me out, and literally within a week, I had a job at Salesforce.com, which was so interesting in the fact that when I was speaking to the vice president in my interview, he said, well, how do you see this working? Because, of course, they were based in California. I was based in Nebraska. And our interview was over the phone. And he said, where's area code 402 anyway? I said, I can't believe you don't know that. That's Omaha, Nebraska. And he said, well, how do you think this is going to work? And I said, well, I think, because I knew my family, wasn't, willing to move to California. I said, well, I think maybe a week in the outsourced team, a week in California, and 2 weeks, a month in Omaha. And he said, well, I'm not tied for that position necessarily to be California based. And I was like, okay, great. And so, fast forward to the conversation when they were giving me the offer, the recruiter's like, say we were thinking maybe a week in California, a week in the outsourcers, and 2 weeks at home. What do you think? And I'm just like, okay, I think that'll be just fine, because of course that's what I suggested. So, here we go. I'm now going to be a telecommuter, with a technology company, most innovative company, by Forbes at that time. I'm 48 years old, having a chance to learn a brand new technology set in a, brand new city, and not going to have to move my family. And so, I was just a little bit shocked and amazed that although I'd planted the seed back in January, it wasn't time for it to become real, until I started, actually I noticed it was 10 years ago yesterday that I started my adventure, at Salesforce, which was a fabulous adventure. And one of the things that I knew is that, a Silicon Valley company like Salesforce was literally going to suck every ounce of energy that I had if I wasn't careful, because, it was a company that moved very, very fast. So I made a commitment to myself that I would still do a spiritual adventure. And so, again, the way things go for me is I saw someone post something on Facebook, and I thought, that sounds interesting. But I let it sit for a little bit. Well, that weekend, I had a dream that one of my really good friends, David, had posted on Facebook the list of who was going on that trip, and my name was on it. So this was all in a dream. And so for me, the fact that it was David, who knew me very well, that it was on Facebook and it showed up in a dream, like I knew I was supposed to go on this trip. So to continue with your golden thread idea, is this trip was a spiritual pilgrimage that we went to the Chartres Cathedral. We followed the Mary Magdalene story, but most importantly was a chance for me to meet the woman who was leading this adventure. Her name was Cynthia James. And I didn't know anything about her, and I didn't know why. But of course, once I went on that spiritual journey with her, then it became clear that she was going to be one of my mentors and teachers, for the next adventure. So that golden thread just led me to actually meet her, in France, and then, continue to go on the adventure. And so I'm in France. I'm going to go on this adventure. First day on the bus, I know like one or two people, in this group, and I sit down on the bus, and they have flyers on the bus, and I pick up the flyer, and it says Adventure to Machu Picchu in Peru. And I was like, wait a second here. Like, wait a second, because like I'm just starting this adventure in France, but I had this strong sense that I was supposed to go to Peru. And I'm like, okay, I'm confused. So I just kind of, hung tight on that. But it was very clear that, this spiritual golden thread adventures was that one of my next adventures, was to go with her, actually to Peru. And, there's a lot of, we had very special experiences in Machu Picchu. But it was a case where this was a commitment that I made, that although I was doing fabulous work, at this technology company, I was honoring my commitment to my spiritual journey. So I continued on these adventures. And then she also had a coaching program. And so we kind of had this interesting conversation, because she, had people apply, and like I didn't, I work for a technology company, so I'm not a coach. I do this kind of because I love to help and serve people, but I didn't see myself as a professional coach. And she said, yeah, but you're supposed to be part of this program. I'm like, okay, fine. So I submitted my application, and then I became part of her coaching program, which has really helped me, in my professional job, because, I manage people, I interact with people all the time. So although I'm not a professional coach, I can do a lot of great work with people, in my day job.
Amazing. Just it's a delight to hear this. It's again, to set it out there. I think key for me through all of this right now is, that it's one of the things that let me say, I have to qualify. I try to tell people when they tell me that they're really hooked on the law of attraction, creative visualization, etc. And I say, well, I'll try to do this real quick. I think I told you the story about the time I manifested a new car.
Yeah.
And it was actually from George. We both know George. From his dealership, I had two 10-year-old cars. I was completely broke. The bean had kind of, I think we were all out of money. I didn't have any money. I had no credit. So in two 10-year-old cars, and I had my Russian family at the time. And so there was, I didn't know how to do this. And somebody handed me the book, The Secret. And I went, oh, yeah. I used to do this stuff. And so every morning I'd meditate on a car. Now, long story short, I got I went to the dealership not to talk. I have again no idea how this would happen. And I go to the dealership, and a salesman sees my 10-year-old Tacoma and says, "Are you here for the recall?" He was Egyptian. I've got to know him. He's a great friend now. Uh, and I'm what? He says, "There's a recall on your truck." I said, "What?" He says, "Go talk to the salesman." And sure enough, the service manager said, "Yeah, there's rust on those trucks. I need your keys." And he says, "And if you've got rust, you can't." And as soon as I gave him the keys, I just knew that I was getting this was the answer. I was going to get a new car. Sure enough, I came back, and I mentioned nothing to George, so he didn't pull any strings. And when I went back, the serviceman said, "Yeah, you've got rust on that truck. You can't take it. And Toyota will be sending you a check for $13,000." The truck was 10 years old, and I had bought it secondhand, and I got about 6 or 7 years out of it. Um, and so I just smiled. I said, and they're going again, we're going to qualify. I just manifested a truck. And he says, "Yeah." And he says, "And there's a rental vehicle coming to you from one of the rental companies." And he said, "It'll be here in a couple of minutes." So he says, "You can use that for the 3 weeks, and there's no charge." So I go out in this Tundra. I'm waiting in the parking lot. It's a beautiful Tundra. I left in a 1999 Tacoma, and a 2009 Tacoma comes a big black Tundra came around the corner with this gorgeous, cute blonde, California-looking gal driving it. She couldn't have been more than early 20s. And she pulls up to me and says, "Is this yours?" And I said, "Yeah, I think so." And she said to me, "How's your day going?" And I teased her, and I said something. I flirted with her, and I said, "Honey, you tell me you're coming with that truck, it's going to be one of the best days of my life." So she laughed. I got in, and I continued to laugh. And she says to me, "What are you laughing about?" I goes, "I just manifested a new car." I said, "Somebody handed me the book The Secret a couple of weeks ago, and I just did everything in there." And she said, now she was young. So just as, how is it coincidental that you and I were reading or familiar with the law of attraction with Abraham Hicks? She says to me, "I love that book." She said, "I read it cover to cover." And she says, "But Tom," now this was an amazing lesson for me. This shifted my thinking drastically with her words. And again, I have to think that of the golden thread. So this young 21-year-old, very vivacious, attractive woman says to me, "Tom, it's a great book, but it's much easier than that." And she says, "God's got a plan for you. And if you just relax, everything's going to work out." And so I'm thinking, not only did I get a new truck, get the ride home in a new truck. Of course, my Russian family, they saw me leaving this 10-year-old truck and come back with a brand new Tundra with about 20 miles on it. And I'm thinking, and they're just staring at me, and I goes, "Welcome to America." And 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 for all of those things to happen, but the biggest part was the spiritual lesson that came with it. And since then, you're right. What I said to you is, don't. How can our puny, egotistical imaginations possibly understand the abundance that can come to us from the other side? We can't. And so, listening to your story, it's all validated in your story.
And what's been so interesting, Tom, is the fact that, like, you never know when that moment's going to happen.
Exactly.
And so, so I had, other events. So, doing a great job, loving, the work, at Salesforce. And then, after a few years, it wasn't so great. And another one of those lessons where I didn't think I had the right to say that this job wasn't meeting my needs.
Let me interject, because I saw that. I saw your energy go from the original high. And one of the reasons I'm happy to and I'm thrilled to do this is because I want to talk about Salesforce at some point in the recent article they did on you. But I could see your energy diminishing, and
Yep.
I was really curious. I kind of stayed back, and I always allow people to, I'll make suggestions, but I don't try to coerce anybody. But it was fun to watch you at that point from the sense of what's going to be her next move. So go ahead.
So two things happened at that time. So once I realized that this job wasn't meeting my needs, the job was eliminated, which again was interesting. I'd been through this before, but interesting, they gave me 30 days to find a new adventure. And so either I was going to find a new adventure at Salesforce, or they were paying me for 30 days to find a new adventure outside of Salesforce. Either way was good for me. So I did find an adventure within Salesforce, but I got a chance to move over to their HR, or their employee success team, which meant that I got a chance to learn a whole new business. I'd never been in HR before. And again, did that for a couple years and enjoyed that. But what was so interesting, because the same thing happened, okay, I'm bored again. And I think that I need a new adventure. We at Salesforce, we talked about finding our next dream job. And so I started searching for my next dream job, thought that I had something lined up within Salesforce. But at the same time, the universe was saying, you know what, there's something more. And so one of my former VPs reached out to me that knew me from Salesforce, and he'd moved to, some different companies. Well, he had joined a company called ServiceNow, and I didn't know really anything about ServiceNow. But he basically, said, we've seen the movie, we know how it ends, we get to change the ending. I think this would be a great adventure for you. And so he was really speaking my language. But what I didn't know, again, because I trusted him, I'm like, okay, so I, applied, again, very quickly, I interviewed, next day, offer came, got the job started. And when I was starting the job, I said, okay, I've got some situations. I said, so first situation is I'm going to be traveling to Italy for 2 weeks, just 3 weeks after starting. And then my husband and I are going on a 3-week adventure to Africa for our wedding anniversary. And they said, oh, I think that'll be fine. You just start a couple weeks before you go to Italy. And so I was just like, okay. Well, and so what was great about that is then I just expanded, my personal trip to include a business trip to the offices in Europe. And in the meantime, and this was the whole magic, of kind of my current, life conditions, is the fact that I had, I guess it was 5 years ago, I had gone to a leadership meeting, and this is how you never know, like, what you're going to be signing up for. But I went to a leadership meeting in Chicago, and this is a group I traveled with. We'd meet twice a year for the last, actually, almost 20 years. And it was awesome because we'd have inspirational speakers and kind of get reconnected. And in this meeting, there was a woman that was going to speak to us who started an orphanage in India. And I had heard about this orphanage from a good friend that had traveled there. So I was interested because I knew a little bit about it. And so as the woman begins to speak, she's looking around the audience. There's about 30 of us in the audience, and she's making eye contact just to kind of assess, what's happening here. And she and I make eye contact. And I hear from her later, she said the look in my eye was actually piercing to the point that she was afraid. She said she had never experienced that intense, like, of a first moment with somebody like she experienced with me. Now, similar to, the conversation, Tom, you and I were having when we first met. And what was happening to me is immediately, we're talking in the first 5 minutes of her speaking, I knew that I had to go to India. Now, I had been to India many times, and it wasn't actually my favorite place. I mean, just because it's like going to another planet. The energy's different. There's just a lot going on. And so my logical mind is going, okay, Lynda, it's India. Like, you didn't think you were ever going back to India. But my spiritual is like, you have to go. Like, this is not optional. Like, you have to go. And I'm like, okay. So literally within an hour, I had organized a trip, and I said, I'll take my friends because I don't know why I'm going, but if I take my friends, then I'm sure I'll have a good time. And so I ended up taking, a group to India in February of 2017, which, again, think about this. Okay, this is, a girl from Omaha, Nebraska, that thinks that she needs to lead a group to go to India. Like, what is that about? But, I organized it. There were people that signed up. And what was interesting is, of the people that signed up in this group, there was 12 of us that traveled together. Only half the people actually knew me. So that means that the other half of this group signed up to go to India with Lynda because Lynda thought this was a good idea. I mean, we're talking 8,000 miles away, these people.
Wow.
And the other thing that was interesting about this group is the fact that, I was the youngest in the group, meaning that we had a woman that was, 58, 63, 65, 68, 70, 73, and we had a woman that was 79 years old that signed up to go to India with me on this trip. And, some of my friends were going, Lynda, you're crazy. I mean, this is a really hard trip. It's not safe for these women to go. Like, you're taking such a big risk. I don't think this is a good idea. And honestly, that didn't really come into my mind. And so we went on the trip. We all get there safely. Like 2 days into the trip, one of the gals with me, she said, so when are you going to organize your next trip? And I'm like, wait a second. Like, we haven't even started this one. I don't even know why I'm here. And I said, well, so this was February of 2017. I said, well, maybe February of 2019. And again, I was setting an intention. I didn't know at the time, but of course I did take another group in February of 2019. And what's important is for me that, this experience with the orphanage and the kids and Sister Lucy at this orphanage, like, this is, I now know, like, I've been preparing my whole life for this mission. And so, again, this golden thread that is just allowing you, and I know that those kids, sent Sister Lucy to go find me. And so it's such an it's like, again, who could believe? And again, it wasn't going to be my favorite location. And since I met Sister Lucy, like, I've traveled 5 times to visit Sister Lucy, but most interestingly, my first big project at my new job at ServiceNow was a project in India. And so all of those trips were funded by my company. So the universe was just saying, hey, we've got this adventure in India, and so we need you to go to this new company so we can just make it really convenient. You can do great work at your company, but actually the most important part of this, is your connection with this orphanage. And again, I knew nothing of that when I said yes to move from Salesforce, which, again, people are like, you love Salesforce. That's crazy that you're leaving Salesforce. You don't know anything about this new company. And that's true. I didn't know anything about this new company, but I trusted the leader, and there was obviously something in me that knew that this was, the right next adventure for me.
This is, I'm again, I'm shaking my head and I'm laughing and I'm like, this is an amazing story. I mean, if there's any story that validates that the golden thread, that there's a path that validates why you want to jump from fear into courage, why you want to take risks, why you have to trust. You want to talk about the trust part of this, because my whole thing, of course, is when you're faced with something that your intellect can't figure out, that's the time you go to source and you let go and you trust. And obviously that's what's going on for you.
And what's interesting there, Tom, is the fact that, again, as I mentioned, the spirit thing, had been a constant companion in my entire life. And there was a moment, really my first invitation to take the step on the spiritual path came when I was invited to go to Russia. And the most important learning out of that trip was the fact that I could trust in a higher power. And you can, call it what you want, divine forces, God, whatever you want to call it. But I knew when I was coming back from that trip that I actually could trust in a higher power and that I would be taken care of. And I may not understand, all of what's happening, but that I absolutely could trust. And so, that trust, similar to, when my job went away, after such a long time at this company, I would get just a glimpse reminded me that I could trust. And one just quick story, because it helped me so much, was literally within the first week after, my job was eliminated, on Saturday morning, I went with my daughter to, this event to, buy some things. And then she went off, to travel to Iowa. Well, I got a call that day, right after she left, that someone had found her checkbook. Now I was like, okay, this is very strange, because I just had seen her. I knew she had her checkbook, but now she's, gone to Iowa. And so I checked her account quickly just to see if there was, something to be concerned about, and no new transactions. So I'm like, okay. And so they gave me the phone number. And when I asked them, for more information, they said, well, it's on the caller ID. And I thought that was a strange response. But when I looked at the caller ID, the name on the caller ID was a name I recognized. And I was like, that's strange. And so because it was weird, I asked my husband to come with me. So we drive, to this address and go to the front door and say, I'm here, for my daughter's checkbook. And it was a young, probably 12 or 14-year-old. And she said, I have it right here. And so I asked her, I said, so did your dad work at ACI? And she said, yeah. And I said, how interesting. I said, so could I get his cell number? So what was interesting is, I had to call and find out how he came up, how he found her checkbook. And so I called Bob, and he goes, yeah. He goes, I was driving, I was going to Taekwondo, taking my son, and Saturday morning, and I'm on a 4-lane divided road going about 50 miles an hour. And yet the checkbook was on the side of the road in the gravel. And somehow, divine forces basically said, hey, Bob, could you stop and pick up that checkbook? Because it's going to be important for Lynda to get that back to her daughter. And so somehow he was guided to stop, pick up this checkbook on a Saturday morning as he's, half asleep, taking his son to Taekwondo. But it was someone that I knew. And so, I was feeling a little bit bad to no longer be part of the ACI family, because I'd been, for so many years. But the fact that now this was someone that I knew from the ACI family that was still helping me. And so I figured if God could take care of even the smallest of details of making sure that my daughter's checkbook was safe, that I did not have anything to worry about. And so that was just one of those, miracle stories that happened that helped me renew this idea of what I could trust.
It's not often I get blown away by one of these podcasts, but we had a beautiful one yesterday, and this is right up there. And again, I'm just jabbering here. I've somebody recently said to me, with all of the upheaval and everything going on, and very successful woman who achieved a lot and made a beautiful decision, just as you. How else can you feel when you hear someone say, I got laid off, but getting laid off meant I could spend this precious time with my dying sister and a dying friend. I mean, again, money's okay, and we all need it, but that whole money time uh, dilemma, and it always comes out that time is the winner every single time, and
Absolutely.
that's what you carry with you for the rest of your life, is those moments that, as you said, your peers didn't get because they decided, they had other obligations. So, all of these things. So this person is kind of concerned that at 63, after achieving, having an amazing professional life, and achieving a degree, and then taking time to care for her father for 2 years. I mean, how do you, in a full time, and how do you go back and grab that? You can't. And so she says something to me which, tells me that she's about to learn the secrets that you've learned. And she says, well, who would hire somebody at 63 these days? And again, that is what we all do, and that's the intellect and playing over our gut and our hearts, and limiting ourselves and saying, but she has no idea what God and the universe and her higher self have planned. And, she's admitted to me that she has trouble with letting go. And so I know she'll be listening to this. So I'm saying, there's the key, you see. That's it. That decision when you're at the edge of the cliff and all the other options are gone, that you take that jump. So I'd like your comment on that.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's, again, if you're paying attention, there are clues that are going to help you. So, for example, like the day that my job went away, at this company that I'd basically grown up, spent my whole life at, I got an angel card in my severance package. Okay, like who gets an angel card in their severance package? And so it was one of those things that helped me know that this was, all orchestrated. And I had an intuitive moment to realize that day the job would be eliminated. And so I'd had a chance to, clean up my laptop and, get all my contacts and that type of thing. But as I walked into the building, I said, I am grateful for every experience, every relationship that this company has offered me. And I said, I will be graceful today. And nice. I think that's one of those elements that prepared me. And so as I, packed up all my stuff and I was leaving the building, the person that was accompanying me, she looked at me and just asked me, are you okay? And then she looked at me and she said, you are beaming. She said, what is going on here? And I said, I think it's time. And so nice. To that point of, nice. Being willing to let go of things, it was clear that moment, like I actually had already let go of the fact that this was no longer mine, right? So then I was not dragging it around and not being a victim and not being all the story. I was now, getting ready for a next adventure. So I think, but like if you would have told me, like I said, that it would be 42 weeks in preparation for my next adventure, and clearly I had a lot of unlearning to do, right? And so I think it's important to realize that the universe is going to definitely give you your time, and taking care of my sister and my friend was great, but there was a lot of time that I had to really dig deep and understand where I was, and I had to trust. So I think that these limiting beliefs that we have at times about what's possible, and the fact that nobody, I'm too old or whatever, the idea is, getting clear. For me, it was getting clear on what I love Like, what am I good at and what do I love? And just keep focused on that. What am I good at? What do I love? And then I would tell that story to anybody that would listen. So helping the universe, remember what am I good at and what do I love, to help me attract, what the next adventure, would be. But the other part that was so interesting, like I mentioned, the adventure with Sister Lucy in the orphanage. In my wildest dreams, I could not have said that was even on my list. And so it's a perfect example where the divine, had a much greater plan, and all I needed to do was say yes. And so when I had that feeling with Sister Lucy and I knew I had to go, my logical mind that said, you don't really even like India, could have just shut me down right then. But my heart knew, you have to go. And so being able to understand what's happening in your logical mind, just like the trek in the Himalayas versus the house payments, the logical mind would say, I think you need to do the house payments, Lynda. But I'm like, wait a second, but what can I say yes to? And so this is a case where, having that possibility of what can I say yes to, because you don't know where that's going to lead you. And so for me, that's, when I'm not sure, like, I'll just be quiet and just see what's coming and what can I say yes to.
I'm speechless. I'm having one of those moments and thinking, I'm a big fan of Steve Jobs. I think pro or con, he, in spite of all of the wonderful, he had some issues with his family and stuff, but in the amazing achievements he did in creating the first $1 trillion company, but he was also a great philosopher. And I love the fact that he says you never know where the dots in your life are going looking forward, but when you look back, they all make sense. So I'm sitting here today in a place that I never thought I would be. And I'm thinking back to you, all I wanted to do was eat in peace. And you came up and I said, and the next thing I know, how many years later, you are so eloquent, so sincere, so at peace with yourself. And exactly, you're right. That the day I got that phone call, and the fact that you decided to call me after years of us not talking, and I heard the frightened gal, I heard the fear, and to hear you now, you're absolutely fearless. And we entitled this podcast, "The Road from Fear to Magic," and you're absolutely in a magical place right now.
I am. It's quite the adventure, and I look forward to the next, the next dot, as you mentioned. What is that next dot that I'm going to connect to? That's going to connect me, to, the next magic in my life.
Yeah, it's it's so often, so rare rather, that I've, we're communicating here right now we're totally, there's nothing for me to, it's very rare that I can't throw something, out there, cast out to say, well, have you tried this or you do this? You've got it all down. You are truly a master. You've mastered it. And every time I see photos coming from India, and you mentioned two things that were significant in the last 5 minutes. You said gratitude, appreciation. Instead of being PO'd at ACI, you were grateful. You walked out and said, well, it's time, and you're grateful. And then the other key word, which I think it's kind of funny, by doing these podcasts, we're focusing on the people I do them with. We're focusing on the fact that we're going to not dwell on all of the mayhem and confusion and chaos and all the things that are going on, but we want to find people like you that we can tell positive stories of how their lives changed and the opportunities and the magic that's going on. So you use the word victim. You decided not to be a victim. And my God, if you think, what drives me crazier than anything these days is this emphasis on being a victim, that people are gravitating there to find a validation for whatever anger or whatever else they have. And so here you get fired from a job, and the two things going through your head is, I'm grateful and I'm not a victim. And those are powerful steps for you to take to first of all realize the opportunities that are coming your way, and for you to leave victimization and become a victor, from victim to victor, for somebody who's out there leading the charge and going to orphanages. And the thing that I see always comes through with you is love. You have found love, and you talk about it all the time. And one of the things that you've become cognizant of, and I have through looking at you, and again, when we get together, is you're getting younger.
Yeah. It is interesting when you see the pictures, and people comment about, like, what has just happened. I mean, we're talking like 20 years younger, right? And so that part you can see, is making me stronger, more healthy, joyful, and, like you say, filled with love.
Yeah, it's a fabulous story. I just want to touch on one other thing. I think that, again, the thread, Salesforce, you sent me a magazine article that they decided to do on the alumni of Salesforce. Think of that. To me, I resonated when I saw that. The fact that, kudos to Salesforce to all of a sudden say, well, just because the person's not here anymore, what kind of example does that set when they call you up and say, hey, you left such an impression here, and you were an asset to this company, and obviously it speaks to the vibration that you send out, and you're caring and you're loving, and they come to you and they write this beautiful article about you. What does that speak of? That says to the current population there, the employees, we value you. Not only when you're here, but we want to track you down later on to find out how you're doing in life. And just as the gentleman who found your daughter's checkbook, that those connections, those dots continue. So kudos to you that whatever you did there got you that recognition and that attention. And kudos to them for realizing what value something like that has.
It was really fun to be able to reflect, so in doing the interview with them, when they said, so, what was your favorite thing, as far as how you contributed to Salesforce, and, what actually did you learn at Salesforce that's contributed, to your continued, and one of the things that I said, because I gave a huge credit to Salesforce in the fact that they had this program where they really encourage their employees to give back to the community. And so first it was money, and it's easy to write checks, right? But the idea is they incented us not only to write checks, but to actually give of our time. And so I didn't really understand that until I worked at Salesforce. And so now, of course, with the work that I'm doing, with the orphanage, all of that, is really because, Salesforce reminded us and challenged us and made sure, because they knew employees that were engaged in their community and doing things that they loved, serving others. We know that is so, so good for people's renewal, for people's energy. And so, again, it's a good situation for the company because it renews and re-energizes people when they're giving back to their community. So that was one of the big lessons that, I learned at Salesforce.
Isn't that amazing? And that's what we're starting to uncover in these, Will Smith, I don't know how one of his, I just think he's a fabulous force, a fabulous entertainer, and a fabulous example of in these times. And he had given an interview, and he talked about his drive, his passion is for acting, and his drive that he wanted to be one of the best well-known and best actors and highest paid actors in Hollywood. And he said after he achieved all of that, and it's similar to Jim Carrey's beautiful videos about saying, I hope everybody who has these goals, he says, I hope you get every single one of them, the money, the fame, whatever. He says, because at that point you're going to find out it's not enough. And, my recent learning about stories, all great stories start with the hero or heroine setting out to achieve a tangible goal. And along the way, the real story is the intangible goal that they find. So Will Smith said, it's not, what I found out, once I got all that stuff, I wasn't happy. And he says, only when I started to do things for others, to think of somebody other than myself, only then did I find happiness. And lo and behold, here we are at the end of the podcast, and there it is again. It's the selflessness. And what a bright, this has been a wonderful week of podcasts, because I think what we're trying to do and what is happening is we're sending out light in a place where you can just see darkness. And, when this whole thing happened, again, from my story, learning about story and what constitutes great story and the hero's journey, every hero, to be a great story, has to come to a place where all is lost, where he experiences the dark night of the soul, because then he will transform. He will be the butterfly, the caterpillar that he was will no longer be. The caterpillar has to die. So the hero has to die. So in your case, you had to die as that fearful woman, little girl, whatever, from Nebraska. That had to go. Those and they never come when you're riding high, but you lose your job. You're wondering you're fearful about the money. You're fearful, and then you realize that these adversities are so big that you can't possibly solve them yourself. You need help. In every story, the hero assembles an army, and he goes and he finds his higher self, and he finds courage. So you set out to get something tangible, to take the castle, to make money, save the damsel, whatever it is. And along the way, you find out that it's the intangibles. It's love that's important. It's courage that's important. It's forgiveness that's important. And you've done all that. You really are in a magical realm right now. And going back, I think of that day, and who knew that it would lead to this wonderful moment we're having.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey, Tom. And there's a book called Tuesdays with Maury, and that book had a huge impact on my life. And I think about, the time that you and I have spent, at your kitchen table, those times of kind of going back, we're never sure who's the teacher and who's the student as we're walking this path together. But yeah, that idea of we're both learning, we're both practicing, and, kind of sharing with each other, the things that, we're learning.
Yeah, and just, every once in a while you get lost and again, especially with the times, there's so much to react to in anger and, and skepticism and doubt and so I need moments like this, and I think we're on a new path to do this. And so when, I mean, when it's that one flew over the cuckoo's nest thing, once we keep setting more people and free and positive and fearless, I mean, that's the best we can do, isn't it?
Yeah. And basically walking your own path. I mean, what I learned was the fact that it wasn't mine to do for anybody else, actually, like with my children. But if I'm active on my own path and by modeling it, that's the best way that I can help others on their path, is because they see, they've watched, they ask questions, and just like you and I, share stories about, the path that we're on. And I think that's what gives people that, I guess, confidence and trust, and sometimes, just curiosity of like, what was that about? Like, how did that happen? Right. And so then they're just like, oh my gosh, listen to that story. And it helps them get inspiration on being able to have courage to take those same steps in their lives.
I think you told me you listened to yesterday's podcast with Rosemary.
Mm-hmm.
And both of you came to this point. She said the same thing. She had to learn to walk her own path. She said almost identically to what you're saying today. And you're right. I remember when I was going through my divorce, and I was so confused. I was getting opinions from anybody and everybody, and a guy who was a deep, deep friend and just had a great sense of reality in life. And he told me, he said, he says, in the service, one of the things they teach you when the army is moving, he said, especially in mud, everybody's creating tracks. And he said, what they teach you to do in order to make efficient progress, he says, not to ever step in somebody else's tracks, to always make your own tracks. And when he said that to me, again, he came along. He was my angel in that process. And that's when I put down all the other opinions and decided to go that route. And it's the road less traveled. And the part is, I think what we have to tell people too, none of this is easy. It kind of seems easy now after all of the ways we've tested this in our lives, but none of this is easy, especially at first. And you want to just address that for a second?
Yeah, although it's interesting, Tom, because I think you might remember. So I did have a belief system that everything had to be hard. And so you had to work hard, it was going to be hard, and just you had to plan for hard. And in, one of these other lessons that I had to basically unlearn or shift my belief system is that it could be easy. And so I went to Staples, bought my easy button, several easy buttons as a matter of fact. And while I was off for those 42 weeks, I started to change my belief system that it can be easy. So when I think about my connection with Sister Lucy in the orphanage, I did nothing for that to happen. When I think about, how I connected with Cynthia, in France, it showed up in my dream. I did nothing to attract that. When I think so,
that's
right. And so for me, I had to let go of a lot of things. So the hard part, to your point, is the kind of the letting go and the being patient part, right? And the trusting part. So all those things are actually hard when you're in it. But the idea of the connection of the dots and letting the divine, help script this, that's the part that's easy. So it was interesting because you're exactly right. There was a hard part, but I had to also learn easy in order, I think, for many of these connections to just happen.
Exactly, and that's. I'm glad you made that distinction. At the first, it's to give up, to let something invisible, something intangible, to give your life over and trust this thing that you can't see, feel, touch, that you have no idea where it's going, and that is. But then you're right, and I mean, this is what Star Wars. That was the message with Star Wars at the end of the movie when Luke is going through that, through the valleys, and he hears Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan comes from the other side, and he said, Luke, let go, Luke. Feel the Force, Luke. And when I heard Joseph Campbell talk about that in one of his lectures, and he says, what happens in the audience? Innately, we all know this. Even though we are so resistant to doing it, I think that is the golden thread. That's the path we're really led to, is that it's so hard to do. And yet, when he does it in the movie, I think the unconscious, he says, everybody cheers, everybody goes crazy. Because deep down, we know that, even though we're so reluctant to do it.
Yeah, it's a powerful lesson.
Yeah. Well, this is thank you for wanting to do this. It's been a wonderful 2 days, and I'm doing another one tomorrow, and I think I know we're on the right path. And for the people who've tuned in, I hope that it's so wonderful not to just preach this stuff, but to engage in a back and forth with a master. And I can't believe it. I do believe it, and I've seen the progression. But you're right. I mean, I have previous memories, and wow. And you are walking a clear and peaceful path. And you're a light to so many, that the work you're doing in the art orphanage. And thank you for coming on here, because the people we reach on this one, this is a great podcast, and I think it will help a lot of people who are on the edge take the leap. Anything else you want to add?
I want to thank you, Tom, just to be walking the path with me.
Oh, and I just have to tell you, I love you.
Yeah, I love you too, Tom.
All right. Thank you so much. Keep up the good work, and keep shining that light, kid.
Take good care.
Okay, Lynda. Bye.
All right.
Great. Thanks. All right, folks, there it is. Wow. That's all I can say. Wow. And I hope really that what we're doing here, I can feel my energy just building, thanks to Rosemary yesterday and to Lynda today. And I'm going to talk to a good friend of mine tomorrow, Pat Napoli. He's got a comeback story. One by one, we're setting out examples for everybody to hopefully push them along to the next path. Thank you so much, and please tune in to the next podcast.